The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Florence as I walked through the streets that had witnessed the rise and fall of the Medici, the prayers and plots of priests, and the endless dance of power that defines human existence. It was in these very streets that I, Niccolò Machiavelli, learned the fundamental truth that would shape not only my understanding of politics but of life itself. The world is unforgiving, and those who refuse to adapt to its harsh realities will inevitably be crushed beneath its weight. This truth came to me not through philosophical contemplation in some ivory tower, but through the brutal education of experience. I had served the Florentine Republic for 14 years, navigating the treacherous waters of Italian politics, watching principalities rise and fall like waves against the shore. I had witnessed the destruction of those who clung to idealistic notions of how the world should be, while those who understood how it actually was survived and thrived. The world does not care for our moral sensibilities. It does not bend to our wishes for fairness, justice, or compassion. It operates according to its own laws, as immutable as those governing the movement of celestial bodies. And the primary law is this: power determines survival, and those who understand power's nature will wield it effectively, while those who refuse to acknowledge it will become its victims. Consider the fate of Girolamo Savonarola, the Dominican friar who sought to purify Florence through moral reformation. His intentions were pure, his faith genuine, his desire for justice admirable. Yet where is he now? His bones turned to ash in the very square where he once preached, because he failed to understand that moral authority without political power is merely an invitation for destruction. The world broke him precisely because he refused to become what the world demanded: ruthless. This is not a celebration of cruelty or an endorsement of evil. It is a recognition of reality. The man who builds his house on shifting sand, no matter how beautiful his architecture, will watch it collapse when the storms come. Similarly, the person who constructs their life on idealistic assumptions about human nature and the world's fairness will inevitably face destruction when reality asserts itself. The first lesson of this unforgiving world is that intentions matter far less than results. History remembers Cesare Borgia not for his motivations but for his effectiveness. He understood that in a world where survival depends on strength, appearing strong is often more important than being morally pure. When he consolidated the Romagna, he did so through methods that would make a priest weep, yet the result was order where chaos had reigned, prosperity where poverty had flourished, and security where fear had dominated. Those who criticize such methods from the comfort of their philosophical chambers have never faced the choice between compromising their ideals and watching everything they care about burn. They speak of virtue as if it were a luxury everyone can afford, rather than understanding that sometimes the greatest virtue lies in accepting the burden of appearing vicious to preserve what matters most. The second lesson is that the world respects only power, and power comes in many forms. There is the obvious power of force, the power of wealth, the power of position, and the more subtle power of information, relationships, and reputation. But underlying all these forms is the fundamental power of will, the determination to do what must be done regardless of personal cost or moral squeamishness. I learned this lesson in the most painful way possible. When the Medici returned to power in 1512, I believed that my years of faithful service to the Republic would protect me. I believed that my competence, my loyalty to Florence, and my obvious lack of personal ambition would shield me from persecution. I was wrong. The world cared nothing for my good intentions or my past services. What mattered was that I represented the old order, and the new order required my removal. They tortured me. 6 times they raised me on the strappato, dislocating my shoulders and sending waves of agony through my body. Not because I had committed any crime, but because they needed to demonstrate their power and ensure that I posed no threat to their authority. In those moments of excruciating pain, suspended by my arms with my feet barely touching the ground, I understood with perfect clarity what I had failed to grasp in all my years of study and service: the world respects only strength, and weakness invites destruction. But here is where the story becomes more complex, because my response to that torture reveals the third crucial lesson: becoming ruthless does not mean becoming mindlessly aggressive or cruel. True ruthlessness is intelligent, calculated, and purpose-driven. It is the willingness to do what is necessary, not what feels good or what others expect. Instead of plotting revenge or wallowing in bitterness, I chose a different path. I withdrew to my small farm in Sant'Andrea and began to write. This might seem like retreat, like the behavior of a broken man. But it was actually the most ruthless decision I could have made, because I understood that my true power lay not in political maneuvering but in ideas. I would create something that would outlast the Medici, outlast Florence itself, and reshape how future generations understood power and politics. Every evening, I would shed my muddy country clothes and don my finest robes, as if I were preparing for an audience with kings. Then, I would enter my study and commune with the greatest minds of antiquity through their works. I was creating the prince, and, through it, I was executing a form of revenge more complete and lasting than any physical retaliation could have achieved. I was teaching the world the very lessons that my enemies had taught me through torture, that power is the ultimate reality, and those who master its principles will triumph over those who ignore them. This is the sophistication that true ruthlessness requires. The world is filled with brutes who confuse violence with strength, cruelty with effectiveness, and aggression with power. These are the men who flame brightly for a moment and, then, disappear into history's shadows. Real ruthlessness is different. It is the cold calculation that chooses the most effective path toward one's goals, regardless of conventional morality or social expectations. Consider how I analyzed Cesare Borgia's methods. Many saw only a cruel tyrant, but I saw a master craftsman of power. When he needed to pacify the Romagna, he appointed Ramiro de Orco as his lieutenant, knowing that the man's harsh methods would create order but also resentment. Once the necessary work was done, Cesare had Ramiro executed and his body displayed in the public square. With one stroke, he maintained the benefits of harsh rule while redirecting the people's anger toward a convenient scapegoat. This was not mindless cruelty but precise political calculation. The world breaks those who cannot make such calculations. It destroys the leader who cannot balance fear and love, the merchant who cannot adapt to changing markets, the individual who cannot recognize when circumstances demand the abandonment of comfortable assumptions. In every sphere of life, the same principle operates: understand the rules of the game as it actually is, not as you wish it were, or be eliminated by those who do understand. Yet becoming ruthless in this sense does not mean becoming inhuman. It means becoming fully human in a way that acknowledges both our noble aspirations and our savage realities. The man who recognizes that he lives in a world where others will exploit his goodness is not cynical, he is wise. The woman who understands that her competitors will use any advantage against her is not paranoid, she is realistic. The leader who accepts that sometimes choosing between good and evil is less important than choosing between survival and destruction is not corrupt, he is responsible. This wisdom extends beyond politics into every aspect of human existence. In business, the entrepreneur who refuses to acknowledge market realities in favor of idealistic business models will fail, while the one who adapts ruthlessly to what customers actually want will succeed. In relationships, the person who expects others to reciprocate their kindness without any enforcement mechanisms will be taken advantage of, while the one who establishes clear boundaries and consequences will earn respect. In personal development, the individual who cannot face harsh truths about their limitations will stagnate, while the one who ruthlessly identifies and addresses their weaknesses will grow. The world is unforgiving because it operates according to natural laws that care nothing for our preferences or comfort. Water flows downhill regardless of our desire for it to flow upward. Fire burns regardless of our wish for it to be cool. And power gravitates toward those who understand its nature regardless of our hope that it should belong to the virtuous. This is why the study of power is not an academic exercise but a survival skill. Every human interaction contains elements of power dynamics. Every social situation involves the negotiation of influence. Every career decision requires understanding how hierarchies actually function rather than how we think they should function. The person who remains ignorant of these realities does not thereby transcend them, they simply become their victim. But there is profound liberation in accepting these truths. Once we stop expecting the world to conform to our moral preferences, we can begin to work with its actual nature rather than against it. Once we understand that everyone operates primarily from self-interest, we can build systems and relationships that align those interests with beneficial outcomes. Once we recognize that power is inevitable, we can ensure that it serves constructive purposes rather than destructive ones. The transformation from idealistic thinking to realistic understanding is painful but necessary. It requires abandoning comfortable illusions about human nature and social dynamics. It means accepting that good intentions are meaningless without effective execution, that moral purity is worthless without practical results, and that noble goals justify pragmatic methods. This transformation happened to me in stages. First came the shock of discovering that my loyalty and competence meant nothing to the new regime. Then came the physical pain of torture, which stripped away any remaining illusions about the world's gentleness. But the real transformation occurred during my years of exile, as I reflected on what I had witnessed and experienced. I realized that my mistake had not been in serving the Republic faithfully, but in assuming that faithful service would be automatically rewarded. I had confused how things should work with how they actually work. The world had not betrayed me, I had betrayed myself by operating according to false assumptions about its nature. This revelation was both devastating and liberating. Devastating because it meant acknowledging that much of what I had believed about justice, fairness, and human decency was naive. Liberating because it meant I could finally operate according to reality rather than illusion. The person who makes this transition successfully discovers that the world, while unforgiving, is not arbitrary. It follows predictable patterns. Those who study these patterns and adapt their behavior accordingly can achieve remarkable success, while those who ignore them will face predictable failure. Power, for instance, follows certain laws. It abhors a vacuum, flowing inevitably toward those who can exercise it effectively. It responds to strength and exploits weakness. It rewards those who understand timing and punishes those who act too early or too late. It favors those who can balance seeming contradictions, being feared but not hated, appearing virtuous while acting pragmatically, showing strength while avoiding unnecessary provocation. Similarly, human nature follows certain patterns. People are motivated primarily by self-interest, but their definition of self-interest includes emotional and psychological needs, not just material ones. They respond to incentives and disincentives, but these must be clearly understood and consistently applied. They can be noble under the right circumstances, but they cannot be counted upon to remain noble when circumstances change. Organizations follow patterns as well. They tend toward entropy unless actively managed. They reward behaviors that benefit the organization, regardless of whether those behaviors are morally admirable. They evolve in response to environmental pressures, and those that fail to evolve become extinct. Understanding these patterns allows us to work with them rather than against them. The leader who knows that people respond to clear incentives can create systems that channel self-interest toward beneficial outcomes. The individual who understands organizational dynamics can position themselves for advancement while contributing value. The society that acknowledges human nature's limitations can build institutions that function effectively despite those limitations. But this understanding comes with responsibilities. Those who possess knowledge of power's nature have an obligation to use that knowledge wisely. The world does not need more petty tyrants or manipulative schemers. It needs people who can wield power effectively for constructive purposes. This is why I emphasized in The Prince that while a leader must be prepared to act like a beast when necessary, he should prefer to act like a man whenever possible. Ruthlessness should be a tool, not an identity. It should be applied when circumstances demand it, not as a default approach to every situation. The truly sophisticated practitioner of power knows when to be generous and when to be harsh, when to show mercy and when to be implacable, when to trust and when to verify. They understand that excessive kindness can be as destructive as excessive cruelty, that too much trust can be as dangerous as too much suspicion, and that failing to act decisively can cause more suffering than acting decisively but harshly. This sophistication develops through experience, study, and reflection. It requires observing how successful people actually behave rather than how they claim to behave. It means studying history to understand how power has operated across different times and cultures. It involves honest self-examination to identify our own weaknesses and blind spots. Most importantly, it requires accepting that we live in a world of trade-offs rather than perfect solutions. Every decision involves costs as well as benefits. Every choice forecloses other possibilities. Every action has unintended consequences. The person who cannot accept these realities will be paralyzed by indecision or destroyed by naive optimism. The world is unforgiving because it is indifferent to our comfort and convenience. It will test our resolve, exploit our weaknesses, and punish our mistakes without regard for our feelings or intentions. But this indifference also means that it will reward those who meet its challenges effectively, regardless of their background or previous failures. This creates opportunity for those who understand its nature. The person who has been broken by the world's harshness but learns from that experience can become stronger than those who have never been tested. The individual who faces reality honestly can make better decisions than those who live in comfortable delusions. The leader who accepts responsibility for results rather than intentions can achieve more than those who mistake good intentions for good leadership. My own transformation illustrates this principle. Had I remained in my comfortable position in the Florentine government, I might have continued operating according to my naive assumptions about how politics should work. I would have remained ignorant of power's true nature and vulnerable to its machinations. My torture and exile, while painful, forced me to confront reality in a way that ultimately made me more effective. The insights I gained from this painful education allowed me to create works that have influenced political thinking for centuries. The Prince endures not because it celebrates cruelty but because it describes accurately how power actually operates. It provides a realistic framework for understanding political dynamics that proves useful regardless of one's moral preferences or political philosophy. This demonstrates another crucial point: becoming ruthless in the sense I advocate does not require abandoning all moral considerations. It requires subordinating moral preferences to practical necessities when the two conflict. The leader who allows moral squeamishness to prevent necessary action is not virtuous, he is irresponsible. The person who refuses to acknowledge unpleasant truths because they conflict with their values is not principled, they are self-deceptive. Real virtue often requires appearing vicious to those who do not understand the full context. The parent who disciplines a child appears cruel to those who see only the immediate distress, but merciful to those who understand the long-term benefits of proper behavior. The surgeon who cuts into healthy tissue to remove a tumor appears destructive to those who see only the cutting, but healing to those who understand the purpose. Similarly, the leader who makes difficult decisions that cause short-term suffering to prevent long-term catastrophe appears harsh to those focused on immediate effects, but wise to those who consider ultimate consequences. The world is full of people who prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths, and they will criticize those who choose effectiveness over appearance. This criticism is the price of operating according to reality rather than illusion. Those who understand the world's true nature must be prepared to be misunderstood, condemned, and even hated by those who prefer convenient myths. But they must also accept that their effectiveness depends on maintaining their realistic perspective despite social pressure to conform to unrealistic expectations. The world breaks those who cannot withstand this pressure. It destroys the leader who prioritizes popularity over results, the individual who values others' opinions more than objective truth, and the organization that adapts its methods to social expectations rather than environmental realities. History is littered with the ruins of those who chose appearance over substance, comfort over truth, and idealism over pragmatism. But it also elevates those who make the opposite choices. Every great achievement in human history has required someone to act according to realistic assessments rather than popular expectations. Every significant advance has required someone to prioritize results over methods, effectiveness over comfort, and long-term benefits over short-term costs. The entrepreneurs who build successful businesses do so by understanding market realities rather than wishful thinking about consumer behavior. The military leaders who win wars do so by adapting their strategies to actual conditions rather than theoretical ideals. The reformers who create lasting change do so by working within existing power structures rather than ignoring them. This is why studying power's nature is not an academic exercise but a practical necessity. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we all operate within power structures. Whether we like it or not, we all compete for scarce resources. Whether we admit it or not, we all seek to influence others and resist being influenced in ways that harm our interests. The question is not whether we will engage with these realities, but whether we will do so effectively or ineffectively, consciously or unconsciously, successfully or unsuccessfully. Those who approach these challenges with realistic understanding and pragmatic methods will achieve their goals, while those who approach them with idealistic assumptions and impractical methods will fail. The world does not care about our failures. It does not provide participation trophies or second chances based on good intentions. It rewards results and punishes incompetence with ruthless consistency. This can seem harsh to those accustomed to more forgiving environments, but it also creates clarity. The standards are objective, the feedback is immediate, and the consequences are proportional to performance. This clarity is actually liberating for those who embrace it. Instead of wondering what the world expects from them, they can focus on what actually works. Instead of trying to please everyone, they can concentrate on achieving specific objectives. Instead of hoping for favorable circumstances, they can create their own advantages through intelligent action. The transformation from naive idealism to sophisticated realism is not comfortable, but it is necessary for anyone who wants to achieve significant results in any competitive field. It requires abandoning cherished illusions, accepting uncomfortable truths, and developing the psychological toughness to act effectively despite social disapproval. But this transformation also opens possibilities that remain forever closed to those who refuse to make it. The person who understands power can shape events rather than merely responding to them. The individual who accepts human nature's limitations can build relationships based on realistic expectations rather than naive hopes. The leader who recognizes organizational dynamics can create systems that function effectively rather than ones that exist only on paper. The world is unforgiving, but it is also full of opportunities for those who understand its nature and adapt their methods accordingly. It rewards those who combine noble goals with pragmatic methods, who balance moral aspirations with practical necessities, and who accept responsibility for results rather than hiding behind intentions. This understanding has shaped not only my political thinking but my entire approach to life. When I write, I aim for maximum impact rather than maximum elegance. When I analyze situations, I focus on what is rather than what should be. When I make decisions, I consider likely outcomes rather than preferred outcomes. This approach has served me well despite its costs. My writings have influenced political thought for centuries precisely because they describe reality accurately rather than painting comforting pictures of how we wish reality worked. My analysis remains relevant because it addresses permanent features of human nature and political dynamics rather than temporary circumstances or popular preferences. The insights I gained through painful experience have proven more valuable than all the comfortable assumptions I held before that experience challenged them. The world's harsh education, while unpleasant, was more useful than any formal schooling I received. The forced confrontation with reality, while traumatic, was more beneficial than years of theoretical study could have been. This suggests an important principle: we should seek out rather than avoid experiences that challenge our assumptions and test our capabilities. We should welcome rather than resist feedback that reveals our limitations and weaknesses. We should embrace rather than flee situations that force us to grow beyond our current capabilities. The world will provide such challenges whether we seek them or not. The question is whether we will learn from them or be destroyed by them. Those who approach challenges as learning opportunities will grow stronger with each test, while those who approach them as unfair impositions will grow weaker with each failure. The choice between becoming ruthless and being broken is therefore not really a choice at all. It is an inevitable consequence of how we respond to the world's challenges. Those who adapt effectively will survive and thrive, while those who refuse to adapt will be eliminated by more realistic competitors. This process operates in every domain of human activity. In business, companies that adapt to market changes survive while those that cling to obsolete methods fail. In technology, innovations that serve actual user needs succeed while those based on theoretical ideals disappoint. In relationships, people who understand and work with human nature build lasting connections while those who expect others to transcend their nature face constant disappointment. The world is unforgiving precisely because it is honest. It provides accurate feedback about the effectiveness of our methods, the realism of our assumptions, and the quality of our decisions. This feedback may be painful, but it is also invaluable for anyone who wants to improve their performance. Those who embrace this feedback and adjust their approach accordingly will eventually master whatever domain they choose to enter. Those who reject this feedback in favor of more comfortable but less accurate assessments will remain forever amateur, wondering why their results never match their expectations. The path to mastery in any field requires accepting the world's harsh tutelage and learning to extract valuable lessons from painful experiences. It means studying what actually works rather than what we think should work, observing how successful people actually behave rather than how they claim to behave, and adapting our methods based on results rather than preferences. This is the essence of becoming ruthless in the sense I advocate: the willingness to subordinate comfort to effectiveness, preference to reality, and intention to result. It is not about becoming cruel or evil, but about becoming real in a world that punishes unrealistic thinking and rewards practical wisdom. The world will remain unforgiving regardless of our preferences or protests. It will continue to operate according to its own laws rather than our hopes or expectations. The only question is whether we will adapt to its nature or be broken by our refusal to do so. Those who choose adaptation will find that the world, while demanding, is also generous to those who meet its demands. It provides opportunities for those who understand its requirements, rewards for those who deliver effective results, and power for those who wield it responsibly. But it offers these benefits only to those who have proven their worthiness through realistic thinking and effective action. The journey from naive idealism to sophisticated realism is difficult but worthwhile. It transforms us from passive victims of circumstances beyond our control into active shapers of our own destiny. It changes us from hopeful observers of events to effective participants in their creation. It evolves us from people who wish the world were different into people who can make it different. This transformation is both the prerequisite for significant achievement and its inevitable consequence. We cannot accomplish great things without understanding the world's true nature, and we cannot understand its true nature without accomplishing difficult things that test our assumptions against reality. The world is unforgiving, but this is not a cause for despair. It is simply a fact that, once acknowledged and accepted, becomes the foundation for effective action. Those who build their lives on this foundation will create something lasting and meaningful, while those who build on more pleasant but less reliable foundations will watch their achievements crumble when reality asserts itself. The choice is ours, but the consequences are determined by laws as inexorable as gravity itself. We can become ruthless in the intelligent, sophisticated sense I advocate, or we can be broken by our refusal to accept the world as it is. There is no third option, no middle ground, no comfortable compromise between reality and illusion. The world has spoken. The question is whether we will listen to what it has taught those who came before us, or whether we will insist on learning these lessons through our own painful experience. Either way, the lessons will be learned. The only question is the price we will pay for our education. Part 2, The Architecture of Power and the Illusions of Virtue. The morning after my release from the Bargello prison, I stood in my garden and observed something that would forever change how I understood the relationship between power and virtue. A hawk circled overhead, hunting for prey among the olive groves, while below, a mouse scurried between the roots of an ancient tree. The mouse, I noticed, did not curse the hawk for being a hawk, nor did it expect the hawk to adopt vegetarian principles. It simply understood the nature of the world it inhabited and acted accordingly, staying hidden, moving quickly, and never venturing far from protective cover. Human beings, I reflected, are the only creatures who seem to expect the world to conform to their moral preferences rather than adapting their behavior to the world's realities. We alone suffer from the delusion that good intentions should be rewarded regardless of their effectiveness, that noble goals justify incompetent execution, and that the universe owes us favorable outcomes simply because we desire them. This delusion is not merely inconvenient, it is dangerous. It creates a fundamental mismatch between how we think the world works and how it actually works. This mismatch leaves us vulnerable to those who understand reality more clearly and are willing to act according to its requirements rather than their preferences. Consider the fate of Piero Soderini, the Gonfalonier of Florence during my years of service. Soderini was, by any measure, a good man. He was honest, well-intentioned, and genuinely committed to the welfare of the Republic. He believed deeply in the principles of justice, fairness, and constitutional government. These virtues made him popular among the citizens and earned him the respect of his peers. They also made him completely ineffective as a leader and ultimately led to his downfall. When the Holy League threatened Florence, Soderini's response was to convene committees, seek consensus, and attempt to negotiate reasonable solutions to unreasonable problems. He could not bring himself to act decisively because decision requires choosing sides, and choosing sides conflicts with his desire to be fair to everyone. He could not mobilize the city's resources effectively because mobilization requires compelling people to sacrifice their immediate interests for long-term benefits, and compulsion conflicts with his respect for individual autonomy. most fatally, he could not recognize that his enemies were not operating according to the same moral framework that guided his own actions. While he sought win-win solutions that would satisfy everyone's legitimate interests, they sought zero-sum victories that would eliminate opposition entirely. While he tried to build consensus through reasonable discussion, they built power through strategic alliances and calculated intimidation. While he appealed to justice and fairness, they appealed to fear and self-interest. The result was entirely predictable to anyone who understood power's nature. The Holy League grew stronger while Florence grew weaker. External enemies became more confident while internal unity crumbled. Those who understood force triumphed over those who preferred persuasion. Soderini was eventually forced into exile, and the republic he had tried to preserve through virtuous leadership was destroyed by his very virtue. This outcome was not accidental or unfair. It was the inevitable consequence of bringing moral tools to a power contest. Soderini's failure was not a failure of character but a failure of understanding. He mistook his role as a leader, believing that his job was to be virtuous rather than to be effective. He confused means with ends, prioritizing the moral quality of his methods over the practical quality of his results. The world punished this confusion with characteristic ruthlessness. It did not care about Soderini's intentions or his moral purity. It cared only about his effectiveness at protecting Florentine interests and advancing Florentine power. When he failed at this fundamental task, the world replaced him with someone who understood the requirements of leadership more clearly. This pattern repeats throughout history with depressing regularity. The Roman Republic fell not to external conquest but to internal leaders who understood power better than their more virtuous competitors. The Byzantine Empire collapsed not because its emperors lacked moral principles but because their enemies possessed superior strategic thinking. In our own time, we see democratic institutions threatened not by external invasion but by internal actors who understand manipulation better than their opponents understand governance. The common factor in all these cases is the same: those who prioritize virtue over effectiveness lose to those who prioritize effectiveness over virtue. This is not because the world is evil or because virtue is worthless, but because virtue without power cannot protect itself or accomplish anything meaningful. Yet acknowledging this reality creates a profound dilemma for anyone who values moral principles. If virtue leads to defeat and ruthlessness leads to victory, what guidance can we offer to those who want both to succeed and to maintain their integrity? How can we reconcile the demands of effectiveness with the requirements of conscience? The answer lies in understanding that the apparent contradiction between virtue and effectiveness is largely false. True virtue, as opposed to the performance of virtue, requires achieving good outcomes, not merely having good intentions. The leader who allows his city to be conquered because he refuses to make morally ambiguous decisions is not virtuous, he is irresponsible. The person who permits evil to triumph because taking effective action would require getting his hands dirty is not pure, he is complicit. This understanding transforms our entire approach to moral reasoning. Instead of asking whether an action is virtuous in the abstract, we must ask whether it serves virtuous ends in the concrete circumstances we face. Instead of judging methods by their conformity to ideal standards, we must judge them by their effectiveness at achieving beneficial outcomes. Instead of prioritizing moral purity over practical results, we must recognize that moral purity without practical results is merely self-indulgence. This shift in perspective is difficult for those raised on conventional moral philosophy, which tends to treat virtue as an end in itself rather than as a means to beneficial outcomes. We are taught that certain actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of context or consequences. We learn to value consistency over adaptability, principles over pragmatism, and moral clarity over strategic thinking. But the world operates according to different principles. It judges us not by our intentions but by our results, not by our consistency but by our effectiveness, not by our moral clarity but by our practical wisdom. Those who cannot adapt their moral reasoning to these realities will find themselves consistently outmaneuvered by those who can. This does not mean abandoning moral considerations entirely. It means developing a more sophisticated understanding of how moral principles apply in complex, competitive environments. It means learning to distinguish between actions that appear immoral but serve moral purposes and actions that appear moral but enable immoral outcomes. The art of this distinction lies in understanding the relationship between immediate means and ultimate ends. Sometimes serving good ends requires using methods that appear questionable in isolation. The surgeon must cut to heal, the teacher must discipline to educate, and the leader must sometimes act harshly to prevent greater suffering. But this principle can also be misused by those who invoke noble ends to justify ignoble means. The tyrant claims he oppresses people for their own good. The war criminal argues that his atrocities serve national security. The corrupt official insists that his theft funds important causes. The difference between legitimate and illegitimate applications of this principle lies in the sincerity of the commitment to beneficial outcomes and the proportionality of the means to the ends. Those who genuinely seek good outcomes will use harsh methods reluctantly, temporarily, and only when gentler methods have proven insufficient. Those who merely invoke good outcomes to justify satisfying their own desires will use harsh methods eagerly, permanently, and without serious consideration of alternatives. Distinguishing between these two cases requires careful analysis of motives, methods, and results. It requires understanding the specific context in which decisions are made and the range of options available to decision makers. Most importantly, it requires accepting that moral judgment is often more complex than simple rule following would suggest. This complexity is precisely why the world breaks those who cannot think sophisticatedly about moral questions. Simple moral rules work well in simple situations, but complex situations require complex analysis. Those who cannot adapt their moral reasoning to complex circumstances will make poor decisions that serve neither their principles nor their interests. Consider the dilemma faced by any leader who must choose between honesty and effectiveness. Telling the truth is generally virtuous, but there are circumstances where complete honesty would cause unnecessary harm or enable evil actors to achieve destructive goals. The leader who cannot recognize these circumstances and adapt his approach accordingly will either become ineffective through excessive honesty or corrupt through unprincipled deception. The sophisticated approach is to develop principles that can guide decision-making in complex situations while remaining flexible enough to accommodate unusual circumstances. This requires moving beyond simple rules toward what we might call strategic virtue that adapts its expression to serve its underlying purposes most effectively. Strategic virtue recognizes that different situations call for different responses, that timing matters as much as substance, and that the same action can be either virtuous or vicious depending on context. It requires developing practical wisdom that can balance competing demands and navigate moral trade-offs intelligently. But developing such wisdom requires extensive experience with complex decisions and their consequences. It cannot be learned from books alone or derived from abstract principles. It must be cultivated through practice, reflection, and honest assessment of results. This is why the world's harsh feedback is actually valuable for moral development. Those who face real consequences for their decisions learn to think more carefully about the relationship between means and ends. Those who operate in competitive environments develop a more nuanced understanding of how virtue can be both preserved and expressed effectively. The leader who has never faced genuine opposition may maintain his moral purity, but he will not develop the practical wisdom necessary to govern effectively in difficult circumstances. The person who has never competed seriously for scarce resources may preserve his idealistic beliefs, but he will not understand how to advance worthy causes in a world where others are advancing unworthy ones. This creates what appears to be a paradox. Moral development requires exposure to morally challenging situations. We become better people not by avoiding difficult choices but by making them thoughtfully and learning from their consequences. We develop virtue not by maintaining purity but by figuring out how to serve good ends through effective means. The world forces this development on us whether we welcome it or not. Every significant responsibility involves moral complexity. Every leadership position requires balancing competing demands. Every competitive situation involves choosing between ideal methods and effective results. Those who embrace this complexity and develop sophisticated approaches to moral reasoning will be able to serve both virtue and effectiveness. Those who reject this complexity in favor of simple rules will be forced to choose between virtue and effectiveness, often serving neither well. The choice between these approaches determines not only our personal success but our ability to contribute positively to the world. The leader who cannot navigate moral complexity effectively will either become ineffective, and thus unable to serve good causes, or unprincipled, and thus unlikely to serve them. The person who cannot balance ideals with realities will either accomplish nothing meaningful or accomplish meaningful things through meaningless ideals. This understanding has profound implications for how we think about institutions, relationships, and personal development. Instead of designing systems that assume people will behave virtuously without incentives to do so, we should design systems that align self-interest with beneficial outcomes. Instead of expecting others to sacrifice their interests for our causes, we should find ways to make our causes serve their interests. Instead of hoping that good intentions will somehow produce good results, we should focus on developing the capabilities necessary to achieve good results through skillful action. The world rewards this kind of thinking and punishes its absence with predictable consistency. Organizations that understand human motivation outperform those that rely on noble intentions. Leaders who can balance multiple demands outperform those who can only serve single principles. Individuals who can adapt their approach to circumstances outperform those who can only repeat familiar methods. But, developing this adaptability requires abandoning some comfortable assumptions about how virtue works. We must accept that virtue is not always obvious to outside observers, that doing the right thing sometimes requires appearing to do the wrong thing, and that moral purity can sometimes enable greater evil than moral compromise. This acceptance is difficult because it requires taking responsibility for complex judgments rather than following simple rules. It means becoming comfortable with uncertainty rather than seeking the false comfort of absolute principles. It requires developing confidence in our ability to navigate moral complexity rather than relying on external authorities to tell us what is right. But, this difficulty is also an opportunity. Those who develop sophisticated approaches to moral reasoning become capable of achieving things that simpler approaches cannot accomplish. They can build institutions that actually function rather than ones that merely look virtuous. They can advance causes that genuinely benefit people rather than ones that merely express good intentions. They can create lasting positive change rather than temporary moral gestures. The world needs such people desperately. It is full of problems that cannot be solved through good intentions alone, institutions that cannot be reformed through moral appeals alone, and conflicts that cannot be resolved through wishful thinking alone. These challenges require people who can combine moral commitment with practical effectiveness, strategic thinking with genuine concern for beneficial outcomes. But, the world will not produce such people automatically. They must be developed through experience, education, and reflection. They must be willing to face moral complexity rather than avoiding it, to accept responsibility for difficult decisions rather than deferring to others, and to learn from their mistakes rather than defending them. The alternative is a world where virtue and power remain forever separated, where good people are ineffective and effective people are not good. Such a world will be dominated by those who understand power without caring about virtue, while those who care about virtue will remain powerless to implement their ideals. This separation serves no one's interests except those who profit from moral confusion. It allows manipulative actors to exploit both the cynical, who expect nothing good, and the naive, who expect nothing but good. It prevents the development of institutions that could serve both moral and practical purposes effectively. Breaking this false separation requires recognizing that the tension between virtue and effectiveness is often artificial. In most cases, what appears to be a choice between doing right and doing well is actually a choice between short-term and long-term thinking, between superficial and sophisticated analysis, between simple and complex approaches to problem-solving. The person who lies to avoid immediate discomfort but destroys trust in the process is not choosing effectiveness over virtue, he is choosing short-term convenience over long-term benefit. The leader who avoids difficult decisions to maintain his reputation for kindness but allows problems to grow worse is not choosing virtue over effectiveness, he is choosing appearance over substance. Real virtue requires the wisdom to distinguish between these false choices and the courage to make genuinely difficult decisions when they arise. It requires understanding that sometimes the most virtuous thing we can do is something that appears unvirtuous to those who do not understand the full context. This understanding is what separates those who can serve both virtue and effectiveness from those who must choose between them. It allows for strategic thinking in service of moral ends, pragmatic methods in pursuit of beneficial outcomes, and realistic assessment of what is possible in any given situation. The world is unforgiving toward those who cannot make this transition from simple to sophisticated moral reasoning. It breaks those who cling to naive assumptions about how virtue works in competitive environments. It destroys those who confuse moral posturing with moral achievement. But it also creates opportunities for those who can master the art of strategic virtue. It rewards those who can serve good ends through effective means, who can build power in service of beneficial purposes, and who can navigate moral complexity without losing their moral compass. The question is not whether we will face situations that require this kind of moral sophistication. The question is whether we will develop it before the world forces it upon us through painful experience. Those who choose to develop it proactively will be prepared when circumstances demand it. Those who refuse to develop it will discover their inadequacy when it is too late to correct course. The world has always been unforgiving to those who misunderstand the relationship between virtue and power. It will continue to be unforgiving until human nature itself changes. The choice we face is whether to acknowledge this reality and adapt to it skillfully, or to deny it and be broken by our denial. The architects of power understand this choice clearly. They have learned through experience that virtue without power accomplishes nothing, while power without virtue accomplishes nothing worthwhile. They seek not the false purity of those who avoid moral complexity, but the genuine effectiveness of those who navigate it successfully. This is the lesson that the world teaches all who are willing to learn it: become sophisticated enough to serve both virtue and effectiveness, or remain forever amateur in both domains. The world respects only those who master this integration, and it shows no mercy to those who refuse to attempt it. Part 3: The Eternal Dance Between Fortune and Virtue. As I write these final words by candlelight in my study at Sant'Andrea, the shadows dancing on my manuscript remind me of the eternal interplay between the forces that shape human destiny. I have spoken of the world's unforgiving nature and the necessity of becoming ruthless to avoid being broken by it. I have explored the false choice between virtue and effectiveness that destroys so many promising leaders and noble causes. Now I must address the most fundamental question of all: how does one maintain agency and purpose in a world that seems controlled by forces beyond our influence? The ancients called these forces fortune, the seemingly random events that elevate some to greatness while casting others into ruin. A plague that changes the course of wars, a chance encounter that creates lifelong alliances, a moment of inattention that leads to catastrophic mistakes. To many, these forces appear so powerful and unpredictable that human effort seems almost meaningless in comparison. But this view, while understandable, is fundamentally mistaken. Fortune is not truly random, nor is it entirely beyond human influence. It operates according to patterns that can be understood and, to some extent, anticipated. More importantly, while we cannot control fortune entirely, we can learn to dance with it, sometimes leading, sometimes following, but always remaining active participants in the choreography of our own lives. This dance requires a different kind of ruthlessness than I have previously described. It is not the ruthlessness of the wolf toward the sheep, but the ruthlessness of the sailor toward the storm. The wolf seeks to dominate through superior force, the sailor seeks to survive and thrive by understanding and working with forces far greater than himself. The wolf's approach works only when he is stronger than his opposition. The sailor's approach works even when he faces overwhelming odds. I learned this lesson not through abstract contemplation but through direct experience of fortune's power. When I was young and confident in my abilities, I believed that competence and dedication would inevitably lead to success. I thought that serving the Republic faithfully would ensure my continued prosperity, that demonstrating loyalty would guarantee reciprocal treatment, and that building expertise would create permanent value. Fortune taught me otherwise with characteristic directness. The competence that had made me valuable to one regime made me dangerous to its successor. The expertise I had developed in Republican administration became worthless when the Medici returned to power. The loyalty I had shown to Florence's independence became evidence of my hostility to Florence's new dependencies. None of these changes reflected moral judgments about my character or rational assessments of my capabilities. They were simply the inevitable consequences of political transformation, changes that swept away entire classes of people regardless of their individual merits or failures. Fortune had turned her wheel, and those who had been at the top found themselves at the bottom, while those who had been marginal suddenly discovered themselves central. My initial response to this reversal was exactly what one would expect from someone who had never seriously contemplated fortune's power. I was angry, bitter, and resentful. I felt that justice had been violated, that merit had been ignored, and that the world had revealed itself to be fundamentally unfair. These feelings were natural, but they were also completely useless for addressing my situation. Gradually, however, I began to understand that my mistake had been not moral but tactical. I had failed to recognize the signs of impending political change, to prepare for multiple possible futures, or to position myself in ways that would remain valuable regardless of who held power. I had built my career on assumptions about political stability that were never warranted by historical evidence. This recognition was simultaneously humbling and liberating. Humbling because it forced me to acknowledge how naive my previous thinking had been. Liberating because it suggested that future reversals might be avoided through better preparation and more sophisticated strategic thinking. The key insight was that fortune, while powerful, is not omnipotent. She operates within constraints created by human nature, physical realities, and social structures. Those who understand these constraints can often anticipate her movements and position themselves advantageously. More importantly, they can build resilience into their plans, the ability to survive and adapt when circumstances change unexpectedly. This resilience requires a fundamental shift in how we think about success and failure. Instead of trying to create permanent advantages that cannot be lost, we must focus on developing capabilities that remain valuable across different circumstances. Instead of building rigid plans that assume specific outcomes, we must create flexible strategies that can adapt to various possibilities. Instead of depending on external factors we cannot control, we must cultivate internal resources that travel with us wherever fortune takes us. The person who masters this approach becomes what I call a fortune dancer, someone who can maintain purpose and effectiveness regardless of external circumstances. Such people possess several crucial characteristics that distinguish them from those who remain at fortune's mercy. First, they develop multiple sources of value rather than depending on single advantages. The merchant who trades in only one commodity will be ruined when that market collapses, but the merchant who maintains diverse interests can survive the failure of any particular venture. The politician who builds power only through formal position will be helpless when that position is removed, but the politician who cultivates relationships, skills, and reputation can recreate influence in new contexts. I discovered this principle through my own experience of loss and rebuilding. When I was stripped of my formal position in the Florentine government, I initially felt that my career was over. But gradually I realized that my real value had never been my title but my knowledge, my analytical abilities, and my understanding of political dynamics. These advantages could not be confiscated by hostile regimes or lost through external changes. This recognition led me to invest my efforts differently during my years of exile. Instead of trying to regain my former position through political maneuvering, I focused on developing my ideas through writing. Instead of depending on the favor of current rulers, I created works that would be valuable to future leaders regardless of their political affiliations. Instead of building my identity around a specific role, I built it around capabilities that could be applied in many different contexts. The result was not just personal survival but transformation into something more influential than I had ever been in formal government service. My writings have shaped political thinking across centuries and cultures, while my former colleagues have been forgotten by all but specialized historians. By learning to dance with fortune rather than fighting against her, I achieved a form of success that no external force could destroy. This transformation required developing what might be called strategic patience, the ability to accept temporary setbacks while working steadily toward long-term objectives. Most people become either passive in the face of adversity, accepting whatever fortune brings, or frantic, trying to force immediate solutions to complex problems. Both approaches fail because they misunderstand the nature of the game being played. Strategic patience recognizes that significant achievements require time to develop and that setbacks are often opportunities in disguise. The person who loses a job may discover a more suitable career. The entrepreneur whose first venture fails may learn lessons that ensure the success of subsequent attempts. The leader who faces political defeat may develop insights that make future victory more likely. But strategic patience must be distinguished from mere passivity. It is not about accepting whatever happens but about choosing responses that serve long-term objectives rather than providing short-term emotional satisfaction. It requires the discipline to invest in capabilities that may not pay off immediately and the wisdom to recognize which battles are worth fighting. This wisdom develops through experience with fortune's patterns. While individual events may seem random, larger patterns become visible to those who observe carefully over time. Economic cycles create predictable opportunities for those who understand their rhythms. Political changes follow patterns that can be anticipated by students of history. Social trends develop according to dynamics that can be analyzed and projected. The fortune dancer learns to read these patterns and position himself accordingly. He saves during boom periods to invest during busts. He builds alliances during peaceful times to have support during conflicts. He develops skills during stable periods to have options during transformations. He treats current success as preparation for future challenges rather than as permanent achievement. This approach requires a fundamentally different relationship with uncertainty than most people maintain. Instead of seeking security through attempting to control external circumstances, the fortune dancer finds security through developing internal capabilities that enable effective response to whatever circumstances arise. Instead of fearing change, he learns to profit from it by being better prepared than his competitors. The second crucial characteristic of fortune dancers is their ability to recognize and exploit timing. Fortune creates windows of opportunity, but these windows are usually brief and often unexpected. Those who can recognize them quickly and act decisively can achieve results that would be impossible under normal circumstances. Those who hesitate or fail to recognize opportunities will watch them pass to more alert competitors. Timing in this sense is not just about speed but about understanding context. The same action that fails completely in one situation may succeed brilliantly in another. The key is developing the judgment to distinguish between these situations and the courage to act when the moment is right. Caesar understood this principle when he crossed the Rubicon. The action itself, marching on Rome with an army, had been attempted by others with disastrous results. But Caesar recognized that political circumstances had created a unique window of opportunity. His enemies were divided, his supporters were positioned strategically, and public opinion was favorable to change. By acting decisively at this moment, he transformed himself from a provincial governor into the master of the Mediterranean world. The same principle operates in less dramatic contexts. The entrepreneur who launches a business just as market conditions become favorable may succeed where earlier attempts failed. The job seeker who applies just as organizational needs align with their capabilities may find opportunities that seemed impossible months earlier. The investor who buys when others are selling may profit from panics that destroy less patient speculators. But recognizing such opportunities requires constant attention to changing circumstances and the intellectual flexibility to revise assumptions when evidence suggests they are no longer valid. Most people become attached to particular ways of understanding their situation and fail to notice when those understandings become obsolete. They continue applying strategies that worked in the past even when current conditions call for completely different approaches. The fortune dancer cultivates what I call situational awareness, the ability to assess current circumstances accurately without being biased by past experience or future hopes. This requires emotional detachment from previous investments and intellectual humility about our ability to predict future developments. It means staying alert to signals that suggest change is coming and being prepared to adapt quickly when it arrives. This adaptability is perhaps the most difficult aspect of fortune dancing to master because it conflicts with human nature's preference for consistency and predictability. We want to believe that the world will remain stable enough for our long-term plans to work as designed. We resist evidence that our assumptions need updating because such evidence implies that our previous efforts may have been misdirected. But the world does not care about our psychological comfort. It continues to change regardless of our preferences, and those who cannot adapt to its changes will be replaced by those who can. This replacement happens in every domain of human activity. Businesses that cannot adapt to new technologies fail, governments that cannot respond to social changes fall, individuals who cannot adjust to economic transformations lose their livelihoods. The third characteristic of successful fortune dancers is their ability to maintain agency even in circumstances that seem to offer no good choices. Fortune often presents us with situations where all available options appear unacceptable. The leader who must choose between betraying allies and sacrificing innocent lives faces such a dilemma. The entrepreneur who must decide between bankrupting himself and betraying investors confronts a similar choice. Most people become paralyzed in such situations because they have been trained to think in terms of finding right answers rather than making least bad choices. They wait for better options to appear rather than accepting responsibility for choosing among imperfect alternatives. This paralysis often makes their situation worse by allowing problems to compound while they search for perfect solutions. The fortune dancer recognizes that perfect solutions rarely exist and that waiting for them is usually a luxury he cannot afford. Instead, he focuses on choosing the option that serves his long-term objectives best, even if it requires accepting short-term costs or moral ambiguity. He understands that inaction is also a choice, one that often serves neither his principles nor his interests. This willingness to choose among imperfect alternatives requires courage, but it also requires a sophisticated understanding of how to evaluate trade-offs. The person who cannot distinguish between different degrees of moral compromise will be unable to make necessary distinctions when circumstances demand them. The leader who cannot calculate the relative costs of different courses of action will make decisions based on emotion rather than analysis. Developing this sophistication requires experience with difficult decisions and honest reflection on their consequences. It means learning from both successes and failures, understanding why certain approaches worked while others did not, and gradually building the practical wisdom necessary to navigate complex situations effectively. But this learning process is precisely what the world provides to those willing to engage with it seriously. Every challenging situation offers lessons about how to handle similar challenges more effectively in the future. Every mistake provides information about how to avoid repeating it. Every success reveals principles that can be applied in other contexts. The fortune dancer embraces this educational aspect of experience rather than simply enduring it. He treats setbacks as tuition paid for valuable lessons rather than as punishments for moral failings. He analyzes his successes to understand what made them possible rather than attributing them to luck or natural ability. He constantly seeks to extract maximum learning from every experience, whether positive or negative. This approach transforms the relationship with fortune from one of victimization to one of partnership. Instead of being at fortune's mercy, the fortune dancer becomes her collaborator, someone who can work with her patterns rather than being destroyed by them. This partnership does not eliminate uncertainty or guarantee success, but it dramatically improves the odds of achieving meaningful objectives despite changing circumstances. The final characteristic of effective fortune dancers is their ability to maintain long-term perspective while responding effectively to short-term pressures. This balance is crucial because both excessive focus on immediate concerns and excessive detachment from current realities can be destructive. The person who cannot see beyond current crises will make decisions that solve immediate problems while creating larger future difficulties. The person who focuses only on long-term goals will miss opportunities and threats that require immediate attention. Maintaining this balance requires what might be called nested thinking, the ability to operate simultaneously at multiple time horizons. The effective leader thinks about what needs to be done today to address current crises, what needs to be done this year to position his organization for success, and what needs to be done over decades to ensure lasting significance. Each level of thinking informs the others without dominating them. This multi-level awareness allows the fortune dancer to make tactical decisions that serve strategic purposes, to accept short-term costs that generate long-term benefits, and to sacrifice immediate gratification for sustainable success. It enables him to remain responsive to changing circumstances while maintaining consistent direction toward meaningful objectives. Developing this capability requires practice with complex decision-making and extensive study of how successful people have balanced these concerns throughout history. It means learning from both contemporary examples and historical cases, understanding how context affects the application of general principles, and gradually building the judgment necessary to navigate unique situations effectively. The world rewards this kind of sophisticated thinking while punishing simpler approaches. Organizations led by people who can balance multiple time horizons outperform those led by people who focus on single time frames. Individuals who can maintain long-term direction while adapting to short-term changes achieve more than those who lack this flexibility. Societies that can address immediate needs while building lasting institutions thrive, while those that cannot do both decline. But developing these capabilities requires accepting that mastery takes time and that mistakes are inevitable parts of the learning process. The person who expects to master fortune dancing quickly will become frustrated and abandon the effort. The person who cannot tolerate the uncertainty inherent in complex decision-making will retreat to simpler but less effective approaches. The fortune dancer accepts these realities as part of the game rather than as unfair impositions. He understands that developing sophisticated capabilities requires sophisticated effort and that the rewards justify the costs. Most importantly, he recognizes that the alternative, remaining at fortune's mercy, is not really an alternative at all for anyone who wants to accomplish significant objectives. As I reflect on my own journey from naive idealist to seasoned fortune dancer, I am struck by how much the world has taught me through both its cruelties and its opportunities. The torture that seemed so meaningless at the time forced me to abandon comfortable illusions about how politics works. The exile that felt like punishment provided the freedom necessary to develop my most important ideas. The obscurity that appeared to signal failure actually enabled influence that continues centuries after my death. None of these outcomes could have been predicted when I was experiencing the original events. Fortune's patterns become visible only in retrospect, and, even then, only to those who have learned to see them. But, this invisibility does not make the patterns any less real or any less useful for those who develop the eyes to perceive them. The world is indeed unforgiving to those who remain naive about its nature or refuse to develop the capabilities necessary to thrive within it. But, it is also generous to those who learn to dance with its rhythms rather than fighting against them. It offers opportunities to those who can recognize them, rewards to those who can earn them, and influence to those who can wield it responsibly. The choice between becoming ruthless and being broken is therefore not just about survival but about significance. Those who master the art of fortune dancing can shape events rather than merely responding to them. They can create value rather than simply consuming it. They can build legacies that outlast their physical existence rather than disappearing without trace. This mastery does not happen automatically or quickly. It requires years of disciplined effort, extensive study, honest self-reflection, and willingness to adapt when experience contradicts expectations. But, for those who make this investment, the returns extend far beyond personal benefit to include the ability to serve causes larger than themselves. The world needs such people now more than ever. It faces challenges that cannot be solved through good intentions alone, problems that require sophisticated understanding of how power actually works, and opportunities that can be realized only by those who understand how to coordinate human effort effectively. These challenges will be met either by those who understand fortune's nature or by those who understand how to exploit fortune's victims. The choice is ours, but the stakes extend far beyond our personal welfare. They include the future of institutions we care about, the welfare of people we love, and the legacy we leave for future generations. We can learn to dance with fortune and help shape a better world, or we can remain her victims and watch others shape it according to their preferences. The dance continues whether we join it or not. Fortune never stops moving, never pauses for our convenience, never waits for us to become ready. The only question is whether we will learn her steps quickly enough to become her partners rather than remaining forever her subjects. The world is unforgiving, but it is also full of possibilities for those who understand its nature and learn to work skillfully within its constraints. It breaks those who insist on remaining naive, but it elevates those who develop the wisdom to navigate its complexities effectively. The choice between these fates is ours to make, but only if we make it before circumstances make it for us. In the end, becoming ruthless is not about becoming cruel or abandoning moral considerations. It is about becoming real in a world that punishes unrealistic thinking and rewards practical wisdom. It is about developing the capabilities necessary to serve worthy ends through effective means. It is about learning to dance with fortune rather than being trampled by her indifferent movements. Those who make this transformation discover that the world, while demanding, can also be generous to those who meet its demands skillfully. But, this generosity is available only to those who earn it through understanding, preparation, and intelligent action. The world gives nothing away for free, but it offers everything to those who prove themselves worthy of its gifts. The dance awaits. Fortune extends her hand to all who have the courage to join her and the wisdom to follow her lead. The music plays whether we participate or not, but only those who learn the steps can shape its melody. The choice is ours, but the opportunity will not remain available indefinitely. The world is unforgiving, become ruthless or be broken. This is not a threat but an invitation, not a curse but an opportunity, not a limitation but a liberation. For those who accept it and act upon it skillfully, it opens possibilities that remain forever closed to those who refuse its harsh but generous tutelage.